Hello, everyone. We'll give a few minutes for everyone to gather. Welcome to the webinar. We're just going to give a few more minutes as people still trickle in to our webinar today. All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the Garrison Institute's live webinar today, titled Finding Equanimity in Challenging Times, led by renowned meditation teacher and best-selling author, Sharon Salzberg. Sharon is a central figure in the field of meditation. She is the co-founder of the Insight Meditation Society in Barre, Massachusetts, and the author of 11 books, including her most recent book, Real Change: Mindfulness to Heal Ourselves and the World. Sharon is also co-founder and senior advisor to the Garrison Institute's Contemplative-Based Resilience Project, and serves as the Garrison Institute's spiritual director. Before we begin today's session, I'll just go over a few logistical items about our gathering. We are on a Zoom webinar, so participant audio and video will remain off for the duration of the webinar. Anyone unable to attend live today, we are recording this session, and so you'll have a chance to view the recordings as well as a schedule of future events at garrisoninstitute.org. We offer these sessions free of charge to offer support to our community. We would welcome donations of any amount to help us continue this work. Thank you. And finally, we will have time today for some Q&A during this gathering. You can post your questions in the Q&A panel, which you can find on the ribbon at the bottom of your screen, the icon that says Q&A. Simply select that icon and a box will pop up. You can type in your question and submit. You can submit questions at any time throughout the webinar. We're scheduled for 1 hour today, so we will respond to as many questions as time allows. Please forgive us if we are unable to get to your question. And now, finally, we welcome Sharon Salzberg. Thank you again, Sharon, for being with us today, and I will turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. That, of course, is the Garrison Institute behind Elizabeth. And I always think you're there. It's like a very good rendition. So someday you will be there. And thank you all for joining us. This is a topic I really like to talk about. And it's a difficult topic because I think the word itself, equanimity, is kind of a difficult word for us to absorb in the way I think it's intended, the way that it's meant. So mostly, of course, we tend to hear a word like equanimity and we think indifference or coldness or that kind of almost sullen removal, quietly sullen removal from something like, not worth it. And so the word, the state does not seem that attractive a goal, actually, to be moving toward. In the Buddhist psychology, the word that is translated as equanimity actually means balance. And it's balance in two different directions, actually. When we talk about mindfulness and awareness, which we will, in a few minutes, and coming closer to our experience, understanding almost more like the authenticity of what we're feeling and what we're thinking, because it's not so covered over by supposition or belief or projection or whatever. We're actually developing a kind of balance toward our experience that leads to wisdom. And the word equanimity is also used in the context of compassion, of qualities of the heart, like loving kindness, kindness, compassionate action. And equanimity is there as a kind of companion always, because it is the voice of wisdom. It's the articulation of wisdom into that dynamic. It may be, just as one example, the wisdom that sees a friend of ours who's struggling. And out of compassion, we feel so deeply, and we are going to actually do everything that we can to try to be of help. And wisdom also tells us, you know what? You're not in control of the universe. You should try, maybe you must try, and you can do that in the context of some wisdom, some balance, because however hard we try, we're still not in control of the universe. Like, I was once talking to a group of people and I said, I felt that if I were in control of the universe, it would be a lot better world. And someone in the room was kind of challenging that and said, are you sure? So I thought about it and I came back with, I am really sure. And nonetheless, it is not so. And so wisdom doesn't hurt us, it helps us. So equanimity is sometimes seen as the wisdom the balance that leads to wisdom, because, as an example, if anger arises within you, and you're ashamed of it or you're afraid of it, and you try to push it away, there's not going to be a lot of learning going on. And at the same time, if you get enveloped and consumed by the anger and you're just plotting revenge or whatever, there's also not going to be a lot of learning going on about the nature of anger, its characteristics, its qualities, its strengths, its weaknesses, any of that. So we need a certain balanced relationship to whatever we're looking at to be able to see more clearly and to understand it more deeply, to look into the heart of our own experience. So in that direction, it's the balance that leads to wisdom. And in the world of, you could say, the heart of compassion, of kindness, acts of generosity, things like that, it's the balance that comes from wisdom that we want to just fuse together with, like, that compassionate force. So when I was first practicing in India, this was 1971, and my first teacher was S.N. Goenka. He had just left Burma and had come to India and was teaching these intensive 10-day like immersion courses. And Goenka would often go around as an instruction saying to us, be equanimous, be equanimous, be equanimous. And we used to whisper to one another in the retreat, like, is that a word? Like, what does that mean? I never heard that word. So certainly in that form, and even in the form of equanimity, it usually takes, some looking at and some questioning, and above all, looking within and seeing what we find as a state of some stability, some spaciousness, and yet connection. I think one of the hardest things to understand about equanimity is that it doesn't mean disconnecting. We're very connected to our experience, but we're not driven to a reaction right away that in some way distorts the living reality of our experience. In Tibetan Buddhist practice, they have a meditation instruction in some schools, which I don't tend to use as a meditation instruction, but I tend to use more as a kind of depiction of some of the flavor of equanimity. So they say, the instruction actually is, look at the thoughts and feelings that arise in your mind as though you were quite an elderly person sitting in a playground watching children play. Look at the thoughts and feelings that arise in your mind as though you were quite an elderly person sitting in a playground watching children play. So what does that image imply? You're quite an elderly person. You've lived a life. You've seen a lot. You've probably had to let go of a lot. You've seen a lot of change. But that doesn't make you cold and mean. It's not like you sit in that playground, you watch a kid freaking out because they broke a shovel. You don't go up to them and say, hey, kid, it's just a shovel. Wait till you have a real problem. You're kind, you're present, you're caring, you're consoling, you're tender. And at the same time, you know what? Shovels break. And there's some massively more open perspective that can allow the experience to be the truth. Not that you like it, but it's the truth of how things are. And somehow that ability to be with does not mean passivity or complacency, because you've got that tenderness and presence and caring, but in a much bigger space. And when you think about it, I think about it as an individual, as a human being on this earth. Like if I were seeking help from somebody and I told them my maybe very sad story, I certainly wouldn't want them to be all cold and mean, like, hey, it's just a shovel. But if they fell down on the ground sobbing, I'd think there's nothing beyond what I'm experiencing now, nothing bigger, and in fact, no hope. So I wouldn't like that very much either. I want both. I want the genuine human response of caring and loving kindness. And at the same time, even if it's not verbal, even if it's the look in someone's eye, I want a sense of something bigger, some sense of space, which is a sense of possibility, not being contracted and defined by the instance, the circumstance, even the very intense circumstance. Because, of course, people sometimes hear that image and they say, well, lots of things are harder to lose than a shovel. And that is true. Hearts break, lives break, all kinds of things break. But as long as we have some of that confidence that it's not, equanimity is not coldness, but some really immense ability to hold it all, to be present, to acknowledge it, and not to be defined by it. So it's balance, and the balance gives us some choice as to how we want to respond. Sometimes these days in English, people try to make a distinction between responding and reacting. And I think that the flavor of that is really true, that we are going to respond to life. We are alive, and so that's part of it. But there can be perspective, and there can be a kind of living wisdom that infuses all of our caring. And that brings me to what is kind of really essential to the teaching of the contemplative-based resilience project, and thinking about what is sometimes described as a distinction that can be made between empathy and compassion, which of course are two words we use to be quite synonymous in ordinary conversation. But say in psychology or in research, there is some fine distinction that is being made. Empathy being a really crucially important quality. And I think we also do see a world in which it's in short supply. And so we see the cruelty of that and the terrible parts of that. And so I really applaud and celebrate the kind of emphasis that sometimes happens with empathy training. Let's try to instill this, because I think it can be learned in a lot of different ways. But through things like CBR and other times I've taught, I spent, I think, a fair amount of time with people who we tend to call caregivers, although I keep thinking there could be a more potent word somewhere. People who in their professional lives maybe are on the front lines of suffering, trying to make this a better world. People who in their personal lives are either taking care of a specific person or animal, or find themselves in that role, often in friendship, in relationship, the giver, the helper. We care, and that's a beautiful trait. So in again, the language of the Buddhist psychology, we would consider empathy that movement of the heart, that feeling that it's like a resonant, sympathetic movement to what we are witnessing. And it's not really an imposition. It's not like I know exactly what you're going through. It's much more that felt sense. It's almost often a kind of remembrance. Like, I remember what it was like when I felt no one cared, no one listened, whatever it was. And we say, it's very likely you are feeling that because look at that situation. And so we resonate, we feel that vibration. But I consider it kind of a sequential process. Like maybe we genuinely have that moment of empathy with someone's bad situation or difficult situation, and we're frightened. We just kind of freak out and we want to go away, or we're exhausted. We feel depleted. I mean, look at our world right now. I feel like if I was trying to trace a sort of collective movement, even though, of course, everyone is an individual, I would, look back almost a year ago now to the anxiety and then the grief and then the anger and then that movement until we came to exhaustion. It's like, wouldn't be a surprise, if it all felt like too much. Or even in less extreme circumstances, I think we all get to places from time to time where it's just hard, you're tired and you don't feel you have the inner resource with which to meet someone's difficulty. And that's a very real response. Or maybe we have that genuine moment of empathy. And I encountered a therapist at one point in my travels in my life who told me that he found himself often blaming his patients. They would tell him what they were going through, and he would think, yeah, I told you 6 months ago what to do. You didn't listen, so there's that as a possible response to what was a genuine moment of empathy. Or we can have that strange savior mentality that so many of us get into, like, I am in control of the universe. In fact, it's all up to me. I'm the one who's going to make it all better in some way. And so compassion comes as another possible response to the felt moment of empathy. So empathy becomes a necessary but not sufficient condition for compassion to arise. So compassion could be defined as, first, that trembling of the heart, the quivering of the heart in response to seeing pain or suffering. So it's a movement of the heart, and it's a movement toward to see if we can be of help. So there's a kind of balance actually implied in there. It's a movement toward a situation of struggle or pain, not into to burn up ourselves. It's a movement toward to see if we can be of help. It implies maybe a balance between compassion for someone else and compassion for ourselves, and a balance between compassion for someone and the wisdom of limits and understanding boundaries, and that we're not in charge. And that doesn't mean we're not going to do everything we can do. There's a lot of balance implied in there, steadiness. And so compassion is one possible next step, having had that moment of empathy. And when I look at the caregivers I've been able to work with and help teach, it's like they do not lack empathy by any means, and they are burning out often. I mean, you look at now, and I read those chats when they're enabled on a Zoom that I'm on, and I hear what the teachers are saying and, the parents are saying. And there's a lot of that. And it's not from lack of empathy, really, often. And so we look at things like what brings wisdom, what brings that understanding of limits, what brings an understanding of boundaries without diminishing or dimming the force of the compassion. And that's equanimity. It's understanding basic truths about lives that we've experienced, that we know, but we might have to remind ourselves of or be reminded of, that everything does change all of the time. Everything is in flux. That being able to influence things and being able to affect things and the need to try to do that is not the same thing exactly as being able to control them. And that equanimity joined with loving kindness and joined with compassion will be all stronger, and our action will be all that much clearer for it, because it's equanimity, it's balance, it's understanding that we're not in control, that we may not see results right away. That so often what we do is planting a seed and we don't know exactly when or how it will bear fruit, but we know that's the important thing to do, is plant the seed. It's equanimity that allows us to keep trying, even without those instant results we would all like to have so very much. So everything we do in mindfulness strengthens equanimity, because it has to be there, or we're just reacting to what we're uncovering. We're not actually being mindful. And when we do the cultivation of qualities like loving kindness, equanimity has to be there. Otherwise, it becomes get better already, would you? Something like that. A very different state of mind. So why don't we do some meditation together now, and we'll get a chance to experience some of this. If you want to sit comfortably, they say right away there's some balance in our posture. You want to have some energy in your body. You want your back straight, but not like so much energy you're really stiff and uptight. You also just want to be at ease. You can close your eyes or not, however you feel most comfortable. And we'll start by listening to sound, whether it's the sound of my voice or other sounds. It's a way of relaxing deep inside, allowing our experience to come and go. Of course, we like certain sounds and we don't like others. But we don't have to chase after them, to hold on or push away. Just let it come, let it go. Bring the attention to the feeling of your body sitting. Just whatever sensations you discover. You can feel the earth supporting you. Feel space touching you. Usually we think about touching space and we think about picking up a finger and poking it in the air. But space is always touching us. It's already touching us. And bring your attention to the feeling of your breath, just the normal, natural breath, wherever you feel it most distinctly. Maybe that's the nostrils, or the chest, or the abdomen. You can find that place. Bring your attention there and just rest. See if you can feel one breath. You don't have to worry about what's already gone by. You don't have to lean forward for even the very next breath. It's just this one breath, just this one moment, and you can feel the balance of that in your body. And if images or sounds or sensations or emotions should arise, but they're not all that strong, if you can stay connected to the feeling of the breath, you can just let them flow on by. You're breathing. It's just one breath. You don't have to fight them. You don't have to follow them. You can allow it all to arise and pass away on its own as you breathe. And if something actually kind of picks you up and pulls you away, you get lost in thought or spun out in a fantasy or you fall asleep, truly don't worry about it. We say the really important moment is the next moment after you've been gone, after you've been lost, where we have the chance to let go gently and just begin again. You can be kind to yourself. As soon as you recognize you've been gone, it's okay. We let go and we start over. Just bring your attention back to the feeling of the breath. No matter how many times you may have to let go and begin again, it's fine. That's the practice. when you feel ready, you can open your eyes or lift your gaze, and we'll end the meditation. So thank you so much for that. And we can just turn to discussion if you have questions or comments, anything you would like to talk about.
Thank you, Sharon. We do have a few questions coming in through the question and answer box. So I'll start with this first one. Let's say we do feel some balance and spaciousness, and a friend or even just an acquaintance comes to me and they've suffered a truly painful loss. Can you give an example of words, an empathetic response that might be helpful?
I think it's always hard out of context, because I think there's no formula. Unfortunately, it would be easier for all of us if there was an operational manual for, all these things. Actually, to some extent, there is, just in terms of having an idea about skillful speech, like in many instances, it's just not appropriate to ask for advice, or, there are things like that. I come back, though, to Maya Angelou's statement, which she said in a much more eloquent way, something like, people won't remember what you said or how you looked. What they'll remember is how you made them feel. And I think especially in those situations where someone is disclosing their vulnerability or their pain, which is an extremely honest, candid thing to do, they want that feeling that someone is listening and is present. And I don't know that anything we say is going to matter, as much as just that feeling. Even just saying I'm sorry, as cliched as it is expressive of your presence and your caring. I think there are, in situations in general, there are kind of some aspects of skillful speech that become learned behavior, and it's taking it on almost as a form of play, like sometimes, asking people, do you want advice or do you not? Because rather than just offering it, whatever the case may be, or, even though it is really kind of formulaic, use I language, I'm feeling this or I'm sensing that, rather than you should really, scolding somebody about them. I mean, I think anybody who, for example, supervises someone else at work learns quickly that it's not that skillful, it's not that useful to say to somebody, you're an idiot, because for one thing, it doesn't give them the information they would need in order to make a change, should they want to. So in that context, in that relationship, you would want to be sure to be as specific as you can and tie actions to consequences. Because you turned in the memo 6 weeks late, then 3 people actually couldn't go on vacation. And so that's the kind of behavior that, and so that's useful information, and that's real communication. And so in every context, we try to sense what seems right, what seems sensitive, and we learn from our mistakes too. And we also sense in different contexts how appropriate it is for us to respond in one way or another.
That's helpful. Thank you. That presence in those conversations. Our next question is, why is it so hard to remember that things will work out? Which of course they always do.
Well, they work out one way or another, I think people are just wired differently, in Burmese Buddhism and their personality types. They say there's some people who just have the tendency to see the worst. Like they'll walk into a room and they'll notice what they don't like. And even though there may be very beautiful elements in other places, that's not just where their eye goes. And other people, they will see those lovely things. And that's where their eye goes. And sometimes they're just like really not wanting to look at what is difficult or a struggle. That's also quite real. And then those people who are just kind of spaced out and don't notice much of anything. That would be a fun course to do sometime on the personality types, because within each one, there's also a very positive tendency within that possibility of only seeing pretty much what's wrong. There's also kind of cutting through intelligence. It's like a truthfulness and even a courage, where other people may be studiously looking the other way. You're saying, look at that. And that's important. And then in that tendency to only see the positive pretty much, there's also a great love of life and a willingness to live fully and really participate. And even in the kind of spaced out, it's called deluded type of person, and I am one, so I say it without any judgment whatsoever. There's also a kind of equanimity and calm, but it's accompanied by being in a fog. So in all those three instances, if you practice mindfulness, including mindfulness of what you're feeling in the moment, then it will transform by itself to its positive aspect. So, I mean, some people, and I have colleagues like that, and it can be extremely annoying. It's like, no matter what you're facing, it'll all work out. And you think, how is it going to work out? And they're always right. And that's what's most annoying.
Thank you. Our next question, we're getting a lot. Why does equanimity always tend to make me feel sad rather than joyful?
I think it has a poignancy to it, and we feel that sometimes as sadness, but I think then it moves back over more toward poignancy. It's like it's a state of release. It's a state of relief. It's a state of spaciousness. I don't think of it as a state of real joy, except that being free, expectation and demand and insisting life is not the way it actually is. That's not a lovely state. That's not a very pleasant state, So the release from those is got its own kind of happiness, but more I think about it as poignancy, because I would like to be in control of this universe, not for the sake of control, but it would be so much better if I was, really, and it wouldn't take long for me to improve things quite considerably. And I wish they were better for so many beings, but I can't make it so. I can work toward that, but I cannot make it so. And so it's got that feeling tone. I think if you fall into sorrow, then real sorrow, then I think it's moved just over away from the balanced state to more of that kind of protesting against the way things actually are, and so that's not totally reflecting wisdom anymore either.
Thank you. Next question is, do you have any advice on how to develop a sense of spaciousness when you don't have any personal space? I ask this as a mother of small children in this pandemic.
Yeah, it's not easy. In in Asia, they actually would use artifacts that look at the sky. Go out and look at the sky wherever you are, the sky, hopefully. Or when you listen to sound, there may be unpleasant sounds. It doesn't matter. It will still just give you that sense of receptivity in space. Or if you have an activity you do, like wash dishes, where you're not necessarily engaged in conversation with somebody. I mean, you might be now and then, but it's not the steady state. You can actually feel your hands in the water, and it's like a very sensual experience. And get into that level of experiencing something, and it will also create a kind of space. Do loving kindness, especially if you can't sleep at night and you're just lying there, toward all beings everywhere, beings at the other end of the world. And that's like water buffalo and people going to work, and just get that sense of spaciousness is actually something people do. I mean, ultimately, it's going to mean not cluttering up our attention with a lot of reaction. It doesn't mean the reaction doesn't arise. It means we don't buy into it as much as possible. And we get lost for sure, but we can come back. Somebody made me a cup that says, truly don't worry about it, which is something I say, you may have noticed. The fact that we can come back, that we can focus on resilience instead of never, ever losing it, is itself a kind of spacious state. And don't discount the moments. A moment or two will make a difference. That one moment to breathe before you say what you're about to say, whatever it might be, can make a very big difference.
Great. We have a question here from a caregiver. As a caregiver of my elderly mother with worsening dementia, how do I support her best and understand her behavior and words, often mean-spirited, while not allowing myself to be destroyed?
Well, I mean, these situations are so tough. And I when I was writing my last book, I came upon this quote from someone who said something like, grief is love that doesn't have the normal place to land. And that was very meaningful for me, that the grief and that the annoyance and the impatience and the anguish are all part of that grief. It's centered in a state of love that is also really true. The person is gone, or the person we knew as we knew them is gone, or the expectations we had are shattered, or the ideals we had are shattered, and we grieve. And I think understanding that that's inevitable and that's natural is also important. In this society, at any rate, it's not often supported, and so the culture in a way is not on our side as we try to have a different kind of experience of these things. We feel what we feel, and I think the more we can sort of be with our feelings and be kind to ourselves, the more we see into them, and the more we see that longing. And I mean, I know I haven't been in that precise situation, but in similar situations, if I've looked into my feelings, I see so much that wanting things to be otherwise, that they should be the way they were last year, or whatever it is. And especially in this current situation where we don't even know what to expect in the short term, really. And it's just like, it's so easy to feel that frustration and maybe inevitable, but always the question becomes for us, can we create enough awareness and enough spaciousness in our being so that the feelings may come and go as feelings more readily, in the arising and then passing. And so we feel that our actions are not being driven as much, by them. As many lapses as we may have, we're also coming back sooner and starting over in a better way.
Great. We have several questions about practicing equanimity. So kind of combining them, how to practice equanimity without disconnecting, being cold, or feeling like it is selfish.
Well, the way to not feel it's selfish is to remind yourself that it's not selfish, because that is the common feeling. It's wrong, it's selfish, it's self-centered, it's self-preoccupied. Years ago, the image that, well, back when we were traveling all the time, the image that became so common of being on a flight and the flight attendant making the safety announcements and saying, if an oxygen mask should descend, put your own on first before you try to help anybody else. And years ago, I was talking to a writer friend of mine, and I said, I don't know if I could use that anymore because every colleague I have uses it. Every writer friend I have writes it. And it's become like a cliche. And then the person I was talking to said, I was just on an airplane myself and they made that announcement. And the woman in the seat next to me said, I could never do that. I could never put my own mask on first. And then I thought, oh, maybe I can use it. It's still like provocative and challenging and interesting. But that's sort of the whole point. There's sometimes we have to seriously ask ourselves where resilience comes from and whether we can begin again when we're exhausted, just exhausted, whether we can begin again and be present, like lessons learned and, pick ourselves up and when we have no energy whatsoever. It's just not real anymore. It's not realistic. And realistic was another word like equanimity. I used to think that's sort of dull, but I was teaching a whole bunch of times with a friend of mine, Bob Thurman, was a professor of Buddhist studies at Columbia University. He's since retired. And I noticed that in translation and in description, as he was reading passages and things like that, he really liked the word realistic. And I used to think that's sort of boring to be realistic, that doesn't have a lot of dazzle to it. But the more I listened to him and the more I just thought about it, I thought, yes, it's like when we are realistic, we're aligned with the truth of things. And when we're not in harmony with the truth of things, it is just like banging your head against the wall. Which I guess I also say a lot because someone made me a cup that said it hurts to bang your head against the wall, which it does. And so being realistic, being in harmony with the truth, seeing things the way that they are is a really tremendously empowering state.
Thank you. Another question here. The person writes, you use the word protest when answering an earlier question. Protest is so prevalent in our world and can connote strength. How do you see protest fitting in with equanimity?
Well, in the sense I was using it, I meant like being in a battle with life. It's like it's very difficult to understand the word acceptance, and it's very difficult to understand the word mindfulness for that matter, because it can sound so passive. So I try sometimes to say acknowledge instead of accept, to somehow take in the reality. We can have a balanced recognition, like, yes, this is what's happening. And we can take action for sure about our response to what is happening. Equanimity doesn't mean always saying yes. Loving kindness doesn't mean always saying yes. Compassion doesn't mean always saying yes. I just keep trying to think of equanimity as wisdom, and we would want wisdom in our protest. We would want wisdom in the way we regard ourselves in protest. And there is a certain balance, there's a certain perspective that comes that I think feeds into a kind of wise deployment of our energy and our ability to protest and our concerns and our actions and so on. I just don't think it harms us. When I say protest in the sense of doing battle, it means not being able to acknowledge what's happening. And I think about 2 books ago, I wrote a book called Real Love. And when I actually turned in the book when I was about to do a retreat in England, and I got an away message from my publisher, meaning they were on vacation. And I thought, well, great, like I could have had 2 more weeks. But anyway, when I heard back from my publisher, he said, well, I like the book, and my favorite passage was this part Roshi Joan Halifax wrote, where she said something like, don't try to force yourself to view the traumas of your past as gifts. See them as givens. And first my thought was, oh, this is his favorite part of my book. I didn't even write. She wrote. And I was fine with that because I actually liked it the best too. I think it was brilliant. Because sometimes we try to force ourselves to say, this was a great gift and I'm so grateful for it. And maybe that's not realistic. But we do need to acknowledge fully, this is the given. This is what happens. This is what it feels like. This is what's going on. Because that's a much better place than just that sense of recoiling or needing to push away because we think we're not strong enough in some way to be with it. I just don't think that helps.
Okay, I think we have time for maybe one more question. And I'm going to combine a couple questions that are similar again. You explained the difference of how you go from empathy to compassion so articulately. Would you mind going over that again, from the difference between empathy and compassion, and in particular in reactivity to when in conversation with another person?
What I've heard in psychology circles is that that felt sense of empathy as compared to cognitive empathy, where we just say, oh yeah, I understand it, but we really feel, that vibratory element in our being, like, ooh, that likely really hurts. What I've heard in psychology circles is if you then identify too much with that person, it's not so much, ooh, that likely hurts, but, oh, that could be me, and this is what it would feel like, and it would be, then instead of moving from empathy to compassion, you move from empathy to empathic distress. So we might call it overwhelm. We'd call it burnout. Sometimes we call it vicarious trauma. That resonance is a really important, useful quality, and not everyone has it very strongly cultivated. But we can have it strongly cultivated and still not move over to what we call compassion. So compassion is defined as moving toward, say, a suffering situation or person. It's moving toward to see if we can be of help. So there's a lot of implication there. You need some energy. You're moving. You're not just like feeling bad. That feels really bad. Sometimes we feel so bad. Ironically, our own distress takes center stage away from the person or the beings, the people we were concerned with to begin with. So there's a certain balance there. And it's also a balance between maybe compassion for someone else and compassion for ourselves. And very much the equanimity means the presence of wisdom, because we might feel that the compassion means that wisdom is actually there, because we might feel the empathy, but get frightened and just freak out and say, I'm going away. Or we might feel the empathy, genuinely so. We're so tired and we feel like there is nothing in me with which to respond to this. Or we might feel the empathy, and in the case of the therapist that I met, blame the person or people. We might feel the empathy and fall into that, I'm in charge of the universe and I'm going to fix everything by tonight sort of mode. Or we can have the compassionate response. We can move toward to see if we can be of help.
Great. Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you for holding this space for us. I'm going to turn on my video here. Thank you for holding this space for us and providing a little bit of respite for us amidst our busy lives here. We're so grateful to receive your wisdom, and this has been a wonderful discussion with some really important questions, and appreciate you sharing this space with us. A lot of the discussion today reminds me of our own Garrison Institute's Contemplative-Based Resilience Project, as you well know, our project for professional service providers. So thank you for opening that space for us. And thank you to all of you who joined on the call and participated in this important conversation. Please note that Sharon will be hosting an upcoming virtual retreat with the Holistic Life Foundation. The retreat is called Love is the Most Powerful Force in the Universe, and it will take place on Friday and Saturday, April 16th and 17th. We'll share the registration link in the chat box. Please continue to check out our website for announcements of upcoming offerings. And again, we provide these sessions for free of charge. If you would like to support this effort, please consider making a donation at garrisoninstitute.org. Thank you again, and may everyone be happy, healthy, and safe. Take care.